What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Witherley, and as always, well, not as always, a different podcast, but this time, and quite frequently, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm doing fine. I'm a little scared of going in the water.
Yeah. Yes, we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of Jaws on this podcast. We are going to be dipping our toes into the ocean, visiting Amity, because Amity means friend. And we're going to be celebrating those 50 years. Is it a good film? It was the first blockbuster starting of Spielberg's career. Does it stand up 50 years later? And you know, what are our thoughts on it? That's where I think we're going to sit. So let's just dig in. So really, this was before we get into the film. There is this thing of there's two things I do want to bring up. One, you did say about scared to go in the water, but the other one is, where did you come across Jaws? Where does Jaws fit in your sort of life story? Because I think, you know, it's quite a seminal film for some people.
Yeah, I don't think it is for me. I think I saw it when I was young, but it was a little before my time. I certainly did not see it in theaters that I recall. But, you know, saw it on television and sort of, you know, thought, okay, you know, these people are scared of a shark. Spielberg was more important than Jaws for me. What about you?
A similar thing. I think it's one of those that sort of, it wasn't my first sort of Spielberg film. I think I'd sort of, as a kid, you'd had sort of like E.T. and then I sort of had like Raiders of the Lost Ark and that sort of thing. And then I sort of came across Jaws. I think it's what I would consider to be one of those sort of like Saturday afternoon or Saturday evening sort of films. I remember being sort of just being on the TV as a sort of a bit of a staple. So I remember coming across it and then finding out, oh, it's the same guy that's done those other films. When sort of you start to you know, when you sort of get to an age where you understand that directors are someone that do multiple films and they're all sort of that thing. So Spielberg, as you sort of say, became more important as a factor. And John Williams, because like John Williams' score and John Williams' music has been, you know, quite influential and sort of impactful for me. So yeah, but it had more of an impact. It has the good scares. I've always been wary of the ocean. I'm not a fan of the sea or the ocean. I feel there are things in it that don't want me there, and I'm happy to oblige. That's, you know, we have an agreement. But Jaws kind of solidified that for me, and but then more than that, I remember the ride at Universal Studios. And I went on that, and that being a sort of like seminal kind of like, oh, that's, you know, that was a more impactful thing for me.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah. I live on the ocean, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
So I have a different relationship. I mean, I like the idea that you've signed a contract with these animals. No, you know, I don't have this fear. I mean, I do. I'm always mindful of the fact that, like, throughout human history, we did not swim. You know, this was not a regular thing for humans to do.
Mm.
Humans were more like cats. They were, you know, instinctively afraid of the water, you know. And of course, rivers weren't dammed, you know. I mean, flooding was a major problem. But, you know, so this phenomenon of, like, you know, like you see in the film, the sort of people at the beach, you know, running into the water, having a regatta and all this stuff was like, no, this is a weird thing historically. But, you know, you know, the thing, it's catastrophic effects. Like, you know, this movie has caused people to be so afraid of sharks. You know, sharks don't want, you know, any business with you. There are, you know, you're more likely to be stung by a jellyfish than anything. and it's rarely fatal. Um,
Hmm.
but I mean, there's not a lot in the ocean. There's not really anything in the ocean that's hunting you. Maybe some piranha in the Amazon or something. But outside of that, sharks don't want any part of you. Stingrays aren't, unless you're a, TV guy who's messing with them, aren't going to screw with you.
No, other than Great Cthulhu sleeping down in the depths, there is nothing there to be scared of. No, you are right, and I appreciate you exactly that. That really, there's nothing. You can swim quite freely in the ocean, and often, you know, people every day people are swimming in the ocean, and there's no problem whatsoever. I think the water itself is probably a greater risk, in that sort of thing of riptides and all those kinds of things, getting at your depth. But even that, people manage. But you are right.
I've been in the ocean and seen sharks. Okay.
Mm.
I mean, and there are shark sightings routinely, along the ocean right where I live.
Fuck to that. Sorry, no.
But it's like, I mean, every once in a while, it's like, yeah, there was like a baby shark and its mom that just kind of like came up to the beach and hung out for a little while, and people just were swimming around it, and it's only discovered later on film. um and I mean, they weren't there to hunt beachgoers, like unlike this movie where like the shark is basically coming on the multiple boats to murder people. Like it's basically Jason as a shark.
Actually, so I'm so glad you said that because that came up to me, and I want to get to this point. Is Jaws a horror film? Is where I want to stop because people
Hmm.
say it is, and I'm curious because the Animal Attack film was a thing in the 70s. We had like Orca and Grizzly, and there's several others, and even Cujo to an extent, is
Hmm.
that kind of thing. And Jaws is the one that sort of is that stands the test or stands out and is often remembered for a number of reasons, as well as spawning a franchise which is head scratching by the second film, to be perfectly honest, but by the third and fourth film, even they're sort of like not entirely sure what to do, and we will touch on those
Well,
briefly.
speaking of the franchise, besides the obviously like the Back to the Future 3D Jaws
Hmm.
sequence, I had because we've been doing some RoboCop movies lately. A
Mm.
friend of mine asked me what we were watching for this episode, and asked if it was RoboCop 30. And I laughed and said, "I wish they made 30 RoboCops." And then and I said, "No, it was Jaws." And then I said, I had the idea of maybe RoboCop 30 would be the inevitable RoboCop versus Jaws,
Yeah,
or like, you're
versus Robo
coming with
Jaws.
me, shark.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you've seen him in every environment, but you haven't seen him in the ocean.
That's it.
You
He has to wear sort of swimming trunks to go against the
know,
shark.
it's like the Batman 66 or
Yes, yeah.
surfing episode, or
Mm,
like the Fonz jumping the shark.
yeah. No, it's yeah, and the franchise lived out its times. I mean, well, Jaws 2 sticks with the similar character, still has Brody.
Mhm.
Jaws 3, much like Halloween 3, goes off to tell a completely different story. And then they return, and Jaws the Revenge is a special kind of crap that is, and my uh, penchant for sort of novelizations. I have the novelization of Jaws the Revenge. In fact, I have all of them because I mean, Jaws is based on a book, the
Right.
Peter Benchley book, which we'll also talk about. But the fact that, like in Jaws the Revenge, they try to give it a justification, and so there's actually voodoo magic involved, and a shaman curses a shark to go after the Brody family. Yeah, but
Yeah, these are plots,
mm, people sat down and wrote these things, and were like, "That'll do. It's going to go into a script. That'll do, or
Well,
into
you
a
have to
book."
have some justification for, a blood feud between an animal and a family line, right? I
Yeah,
mean, I suppose a curse is as good as any.
yeah. But anyway, we'll stick to this is the thing because these things often start with a really good film, and then they go off the rails. Um, But Jaws, you mentioned the Jaws the ride. This did inspire a lot of things. I mean, this idea, the music from this, the dun 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 dun, dun is used for not, all over the time. There's scenes in like Police Academy 5 that has a shark in, and Tackleberry sort of threatens to shoot it. It's used for all kinds of jokes. It shows the influence of this film. I mean, this film
Hmm.
is hugely influential in so many ways, as well as being sort of considered one of the opening, the blockbusters, the first sort of that late 70s. Um, but it's surprisingly not a big film. And this is the thing: we say a blockbuster now, you're like, oh, it's going to be Transformers. This is the Avengers. This is tentpole blockbuster film. And you go, what was the first blockbuster? Oh, it's a small film about a small coastal community. Being troubling with a shark, and it ends with three guys on a boat. It's not a big. I mean, you and I we've talked about it's like small stories and stuff like that. Like this is a small story, really, but it has sort of personal consequences.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I think that everyone celebrates Jaws for the way it was directed.
Hmm.
And I think that the production of it has become legendary,
Mm,
the shark networking and all the workarounds that were figured out that are very clear in the film, but
mm,
tremendously effective, right?
mm,
Don't look cheap. Um, there you can ding a shot here or there, but for the most part, um, these workarounds, add to the tension, right? It's like Alien, right? We
mm.
can't show the alien. It looks like crap, well, we're going to put it in darkness, right?
Yeah.
Uh, the same, we can't, the mechanical shark just doesn't work, right? Well, let's attach barrels to him, and then you don't see him, but, he's
He's
dragging these
there.
barrels.
Yeah.
He's down there. And, I think that it's strange to me because I don't know how good of a movie this is.
Mm,
Um, I obviously I love Spielberg. I think Spielberg is, underrated by the intelligentsia. Um, and as you say, the score is iconic.
yeah.
It's one of those classic John Williams scores. But I don't know how good of a movie it is. I mean, it has those Spielbergian moments, I think about the main character playing with his kid after a kid
Mm,
dies, and like it doesn't tell you what that's about, but it's obvious, it hits home. Um, Spielberg is just so good at that. And he's good at wringing the drama out of stuff,
mm.
despite everything not working, right? But fundamentally, it's kind of a stupid movie.
It is. I agree that the premise is kind of stupid, but the last I watched it this time, because before I have just watched it, it's Jaws, and you sort of just go along with it, and it's kind of like but watching it this time, I was looking for that sort of, as you said, the Spielbergian kind of touch and where it's going in, and there are obvious moments that you will see mirrored in E.T. and in every other sort of like family oriented Spielberg film that he'll do. Adult talking with a child at some point for comfort, that sort of thing. And that's in here, and it's brilliant. I think again, we just to mention, we'll get onto the cast in it, but like the scenes of sort of when Brody's sort of despondent and not sure what else to do, and he just has that sort of scene with his son where they're mimicking each other at the dinner table and stuff. Like it feels right, it feels grounded, it feels real, and they feel sort of like um, this is a family man. Like this is he's but he's got a backstory and it works. And then there's further bits later on, like the mother sort of the Kessler boy, not the Kessler boy, the boy that is killed by the shark in with the yellow
Mm.
Milo. When she steps up and she's sort of like you knew that this was dangerous, and she sort of slaps him. Is really kind of effective.
Hmm.
So Spielberg, he can wring the drama out of these things. But the other thing I noticed in this is, firstly, he didn't go with the direction of the book, which we'll talk about, which I'm very glad about. But one of the things that is sort of is interesting about this is our three main players at the end of the film. he gives them all. He still drip feeds information about them, about who they are and how they've got to the point they're at, and what they kind of represent in this situation. And I kind of love that you have like Chief Brody, played by Roy Scheider. He's an ex New York cop. You know, he's sort of like he's clearly seen some shit and wants a sort of a quiet life now, being chief of police in Amity. And sort of, you get the feeling that, maybe there's more. He's not just, oh, I've moved off. Like there's been something more to what is sort of happened to him. He gives sort of a discussion around what it's like to try and solve crimes in New York. It's like there's pimps and there's murderers, and so it's a constant cycle of just violence and stuff like that.
You can't make a difference.
You can't make a difference, but in a small town, yeah, he can. And so you sort of feel that he's looking for that. And the same with like, what I'll go into more, but one of the things I really like about this is when you hear about Hooper's initiation or sort of fascination with sharks, starting from his dad bought him a boat. He's like, oh, and then this Mako sort of like, Thresher sort of like destroyed his shark, it destroyed the thing, and since then, fascination with sharks. And you find out that his family's wealthy, he's wealthy, he's from money and that sort of thing. But his dad bought him a boat, and that's how he ended up sort of like, his own hubris within the sea, ended up with him being fascinated with sharks. And then you have Quint, and Quint's like, oh, my interaction with sharks is like nightmare fuel.
The darkest, yeah.
It's like, and you sort of, it starts to give you the cues of who these people are and how they interact and stuff. And I love that. I kind of sort of start to appreciate the texture of who these characters are. Because years as a kid, like Quint is just this grumpy sort of like seafaring, sort of sea shanty singing, kind of a nutcase.
Kind of fucked up sailor guy. Yeah.
Yeah. And then when you hear that story and you go, oh, like this guy's carrying baggage. Like this guy's dealt with his shit by basically going after sharks for 40 years. Like or 30 years. That's some crazy shit. So yeah, I love all that, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I just feel this what Spielberg really manages to do in this is keep adding depth, where you're like, oh, this character and that sort of thing. So, no, I just appreciated that in this film.
Yeah, I think that Spielberg is very good at weaving those kinds of backstories in and not giving you the exposition dump, know, and you kind of get it here and there with a little bit of the backstory, but it doesn't feel too obtrusive. It feels like it makes narrative sense in the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right that, I mean, essentially they all have sort of like dark backstories. I mean, they all have seen some shit, right? And there is a little bit of that kind of like macho world to this, right? Like, this nice peaceful town, it's sort of civilian mayor who's worried about tourism, but like there's the thin blue line of like the men who have seen some real shit who can really keep everybody safe. I don't know how I feel about that, but I do think that Spielberg's very effective in teasing this out, and you can see how, like, I mean, I don't think this is a great movie really, but I think that you can see how a great director was born, and how he learned lessons on this that he would carry through throughout his career.
Yeah, I think I do think this is a great film. I do sort of appreciate a lot of this film, but I also agree with what you're saying. Like you can see that I've watched not too recently, but Duel, which is kind of like often considered to be like the first sort of Spielberg film. And you can sort of, when you go back and watch that, which, for anyone who hasn't seen it, it was a TV film that was so good they ended up releasing it theatrically, which is a guy basically sort of driving sort of through the desert area, pulls into a diner, pisses off someone in a truck or a lorry, and then literally this lorry starts hunting him down. And it becomes a duel on the roads between these two things. And this guy's trying to get the attention and no one believes him, and ends in a big sort of cat and mouse game. And it's fantastic. It's really good for the budget that it had. And it has a really excellent climax. And you can see how some of that tension building and those sort of ideas make their way into to Jaws. And then, as you say, sort of like he goes, okay, well, now those family elements that actually add to the drama will then make their way into Close Encounters, which obviously uses Richard Dreyfuss again, and then obviously into E.T. and so on and so forth. So he really does, he say, like each of those early films, you can see that escalation of like, oh, this is working. I can see how this is, you know, adds to the sort of the tension or the drama or the sort of the, you know, the explanation. And also, just to add to that, like I can completely see why people believe that Spielberg actually directed Poltergeist rather than Tobe Hooper. Um,
Well, I think that, you know, it's funny because that you mentioned Duel, because yeah, I found myself thinking a lot of the 83 film Christine watching this,
mm,
you know, and really Duel, Christine and Jaws, they're really the same movie, you know? I mean,
yeah.
it's all about this irrational force that's kind of, you know, after you, right? And it could be a shark, it could be a car, it could be whatever you want. It could be Jason, right?
Hmm.
It can be whatever. But there's not really any more explanation for it here than anywhere else. But I think you're right that fundamentally, like there is that indie side of Spielberg that really, especially in these early films, that like wants to shoot people sitting around a table talking about their lives in a way
Mm.
that underscores American society and what's going on at the time, and you know, divorce and different feelings, especially like in ET and whatnot. And then there's a part of him that like knows how to do the blockbuster, right?
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
you know, if we're gonna do a shark, right? Like this is gonna reel out of the water and scare the living hell out of everyone. And what? It doesn't work. We're still gonna figure out how to get that shot and cut it and make it work. Um, and he's so good at both of those elements. And I think that kind of combination or weaving those two types of scenes into a tapestry is such a unique Spielbergian trait.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because I think you're right. I love those where you're saying like there's an indie film in sort of Spielberg where he wants to just film two people talking, you know, for an hour and a half. But I think that that's the element that allows when he does do um, the big action, he's so good at sort of bringing those sort of emotional beats, those emotional beats in, that it kind of, you know, it makes the big moments more, I don't know, more sort of, I don't know, it's so much acceptable, but you're kind of more willing to go with it because you go, yeah, these feel like real people. This feels like a grounded, there are grounded moments. It's not just shouty, shouty, shouty kind of thing. It's, I mean, again, like you see the lessons he learned from this. You see about the films that feel the same. Jurassic Park's the same, you know,
Mhm.
'93. He's like, okay, we're gonna have awesome, awesome dinosaurs, and some really scary moments and stuff. But I want, you know, some tenderness, or we want some sort of, you know, a heart to this. So, okay, we're gonna have the kids and Dr. Alan Grant. You know, we're gonna have those moments of sort of those smaller moments where it's not all running and shouting and screaming, which I think another director would have lent into and gone, no, it's got to be sort of like, you know, thrill ride, you know, thrill a minute kind of thing, rather than bringing it back down.
And I think that's one of the ways that Spielberg has kind of aged out now.
Mm,
That, you know, I mean, you mentioned sort of Transformers and, you know, sort
yeah.
of the Michael Bay thing. But I mean, it's true of all these, you know, what the blockbusters turned into is um all the action scenes, all of the scary scenes, except, you know, 100 times, two orders of magnitude more than what this is giving you, right?
Mm,
It's got to be world stakes and things blowing up, and you know, I mean, this makes so much hay. This changed our understanding of sharks. I mean, sharks are still to this day feared and hunted. You know, obviously, even when sharks attack humans, it's usually because they're near blind and they're underneath the human and think the human could be a seal and they take a nibble. And it's just
mm,
that that nibble causes the human to lose a limb because we're
yeah.
really frail, you know.
Because we're
But
not supposed to be in the ocean. Hey.
Not true. But, that shark's just, it's like,
It's
it's
not
like
vindictive, is it? It's not.
a little dog taking a nip.
Well,
It's just that, it's a giant dog and its
yeah.
nip takes off a limb, But it's not meaning to attack humans. They're really, I wouldn't say they're innocent animals, but I mean, they don't want anything to do with us.
No.
Um, so this movie completely revolutionized, our understanding of sharks and swimming. And, every year, there are shark attacks that get, big praise. And it's like, there have been 5 shark attacks at New Jersey, this year alone. What's going on? Are the sharks on a frenzy? And this just keeps happening. And people now sort of treat sharks like they do snakes, where it's like,
Hmm.
see a snake, kill a snake, this, like, which obviously we didn't evolve doing, unlike with snakes, when snakes certainly killed a huge percentage of our ancestors. But yeah, I forget where I was going with this, but
No, but you're right.
uh
Well, like you say, it sort of changed the way you view sharks, but it also created almost like a subgenre of,
mhm.
in movies itself. Like the animal attack film exists, that's fine. There's been plenty of, but there's like the shark movie in and of itself is, you know,
Sharknado.
yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
Sharknado, Shallow Water. There was one in what was it Under Paris recently.
Mm-hmm.
Cruel Jaws. There's all kinds of. There's just a litany of like shark-based movies and comics. I mean, let's not forget our sort of favorite anthology of back in the day created one called what's it, Hook Jaws. I forget what it's called now. They basically introduced a shark story into early. It was Action Comics actually at the time.
Oh.
Hookjaw, that's what it's called. Hookjaw, and it's basically a shark with a giant hook stuck through it. So it's in pain all the time, and so it decides to take its vengeance out on humans. So it was just a thing when they were like, um,
I was going to joke this was the worst adaptation of Jabberjaw
yeah,
in history. Uh, Jabberjaw was my entry point to sharks. And I had little like PVC sharks as a kid and stuff. Like,
hmm
I always loved uh marine life. I love sharks. I mean, I
mm,
thought sharks were cool. Um, I still do. Um, I prefer them a lot smaller than great whites. I don't know many humans who've seen great whites, but um, especially full grown.
no,
But I mean, sharks are cool animals. And again, they're not out to kill humans, but I mean, like this movie was so influential. But
mm.
I do think that
Well, don't we
it's
have like
hard
don't we
for
have like
me to
shark? Don't we have Shark Month
get
now? Like,
away from that.
there's not
Oh yeah,
national
like
have like
Discovery or something has,
yeah,
like Shark Week,
yeah,
where they had like Rob Lowe do the outrageous advertisements for it, and the ads are great. And
mm.
but I mean, people are scared. People are so irrationally scared of sharks. You know, and I mean, people go into the forest and go camping, and they're not like terrified of bears. And it's probably a lot more dangerous than, you know, your odds of being eaten by a shark.
They should all go watch Grizzly or Cocaine Bear. That'd
Yeah.
give them a fair idea of what's going on. No, you're right. You're right. This film is so influential, but I think it's influential in the sense because of the things it does with the shark, as you said before. If this had been like if they used, I forget what they called the mechanical shark, something silly like George or whatever they called it, all the time, and it looked clunky. I mean, at the end when it comes out onto the back of the orca and it's sort of waving around and you go like, yeah, I'm going to let this slide. It's good. I'm enjoying the movie. This is a one-off shot. In other places, it's looked good. Um, it's all fine. If that had been the entire film,
Hmm.
it would not have been.
Yeah, it'd be
Um,
crap.
yeah, exactly. It wouldn't have
No.
worked. I always think that like as you said, aliens are a really good example. Like they were like, we can't use it, but what we're going to do is it's not it's not what you see, it's what people's reaction to what's seen is the real big thing in this film. Like the reaction, like you say, when those yellow barrels pop out the water, yeah, at the end of the film, and like you've got like Quint, you've got Brody going like they're back, and you've got Quint going like, oh shit, couldn't keep it down, and then they disappear in the water again. You're like, oh shit, like he shouldn't be, the shark shouldn't be able to submerge with two barrels on him, but he has done. Like it constantly sort of builds up this like mythos around this shark of what it's able to do. That I think um, it does incredibly well.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. I find myself thinking of how often what's not seen is, scarier than what's seen. Um, I think that's true. Yeah, I mean, think about everybody going through a house, and you're scared of what's going to be around every corner. When you
Mm.
actually do the jump, when you do the jump scare, it's not as frightening. Or it's actually relieving tension that's already there.
Yes.
I always think about Psycho, right? Like there is no murder in Psycho. There's a
Hmm.
series of juxtaposed shots. Your brain's inventing the murder, right? Like everybody sees Psycho and thinks like they've seen the knife going in, right?
Yes.
No, that's not there, right? But that's more terrifying because your
Mm.
brain is imagining the worst, right? And so like you're imagining that enormous shark under the surface, pulling those barrels, um, under the orca and all that stuff. And it's not there. It's just not there on film. Same thing, Alien. I mean, it's like you're imagining that alien in every little dark corner of the Nostromo, and
Yeah.
it's not there.
No. But even at the attacks, like, I think this is the thing is when you see the shark attacks, or when you see the people being attacked by the shark, you don't see the shark. From the opening sort of scene, that sequence of the two sort of kids running down to the beach, and she jumps in the sea, and he sort of like gets drunk, is drunk and so falls over. When she gets to, I mean, I don't know if she broke a hip or but rib or something, but I remember sort of she was in a harness, wasn't she, that sort of swung her around so violently that the screams that you're hearing on film are actual screams of pain, which is can't do that nowadays, but um it really is effective when you see her being sort of like flung around and all that other stuff.
I
Um
don't know. I mean, like I have problems with every single shark attack or aftermath of a shark attack in this movie. Like even that beginning scene, like you're right. Like later on, the shots from underwater of just the bathers, and obviously the movie poster is so famous for this.
mm,
Again, you're imagining there's a shark there. It's just a camera underwater showing legs, right? Like
yeah, but
but
it, it's showing that vulnerability, isn't it? Your dangling
yeah,
feet, you got who knows what's underneath you. That's
right. But you're imagining that shark is just thinking,
yes.
"Oh, look at this food," advertising itself.
Yeah.
Uh, Not realistic. But even in that opening shot where, she's being tugged around in the water, and this happens again and again during the shark attacks. It's as if like Jaws is, you know, I was going to joke, like, this is the worst, Roger Moore spinoff of the James Bond movie.
Mm,
I was very disappointed. Um, but like Jaws latches onto that woman, and instead of like she sort of like shouts, but like it's later on that she's really screaming in pain. Several characters have to shout something like "it hurts"
yeah.
because it's not apparent that they're in pain. But I mean, like sharks don't grab onto you and then fling you back and forth in the water again and again and again, like on a harness, right? I mean, yes, that conveys the sense of force, but I mean, it just seems so preposterous to me. Like she should, I mean, it's got to have its teeth in to be
Hmm.
doing that, but it should be trying to drag her under immediately. And if it's so strong, it would just drag her under immediately. Why is it instead like just like is it just biting one leg and then like flinging her left and right for dramatic effect? Like I
Well,
don't understand any of the shark attacks in this movie.
well, you say it's about dramatic um um yeah, impact, isn't it? I mean, you're right. It's closer to a like a crocodile or an alligator attack, isn't it? That sort of like rolling over and sort of ripping people around. Especially the Kitna kid when the Kitna boy gets eaten, like, you actually see it rolling over. You see the sort of a fin briefly, sort of something rolling over in the water, and the sort of the the water all sort of spilling up. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. If you were to do this as if it's a nature documentary about sharks, it would be kind of tame for that reason, wouldn't it? It'd be like it took a chunk out of someone, it's violent, it's kind of bloody, but that's it. It'd take one bite and then it would realize it's not what it thought it was, and it would swim off.
Yeah.
It'd tug you underwater and that'd be it. That's what often happens with sort of surfers or those, that have been attacked. It's usually one bite and then you're done sort of through that. You lose a limb or it's in your side or whatever
And they lose a limb usually afterward because
because
it
of
has to be removed due to all the damage. It's
yes.
not that the shark like bites the limb off in one
No.
bite, it just rips in with those awesome teeth,
Yeah.
and it's so much damage to your, nervous system of your leg or whatever that it's got to be amputated. But yeah, I mean, even later on when they find the floating boat, this is one of the most confusing scenes to me. They find this boat and it's supposed to be creepy, right? And it is
It
creepy,
is
right? Like,
creepy. Yeah. Yeah.
I know whose boat this is, it's sort of half submerged, it's sort of, abandoned boats are always sort of creepy. But then, you think, I mean, how did the shark get on this boat? How did the shark cause this damage? And then, of course, Richard Dreyfuss goes diving, and it's sort of the one jump scare that really,
Mm.
got me this time through. Is you see the one-eyed head,
Yeah.
underwater. Like, isn't the point that the shark's trying to eat humans, according to this narrative? Like, why is it like climbed on a boat and demolished a boat, and then left a human in the hold when it clearly could just rip through wood? I'm very confused. I don't understand any of these shark attacks. I know. I know they're effective. They're certainly dramatically effective. I know that's the point, but I don't understand.
Well, yeah. They're kind of it's make believe, isn't it? Because like you would then have a sort of a marine biologist in sort of Hooper saying sort of like, oh, this is typical behavior and all this, and you're going like, it's not. It's clearly not, but it's dramatic. I think that's the point. It does lead me to believe, and I've always had this sort of thought in my head: is this is the chart supernatural is the wrong word? Is this a sort of like some is this shark different? Like this isn't just you know, a regular sort of shark? Is there something more to this shark? I mean, not to get into the cursed territory of Jaws' revenge, but like it clearly, like, it comes back at the end of the film, like it hunts the boat, the orca, like despite having had a gun shot at it and harpoons put through it, it comes back like it's taking revenge on the boat. Like that gives it an element of thinking, an element of higher thinking to process those things. That kind of is what's suggested. But
Yeah, it suggests like it's strategizing too.
yeah,
Like, and I don't know, at some point you think like, there are fish in these waters, right? Like that, like it's not like, oh, I mean, there is this myth of like, if there's, animals getting a taste for human flesh, right?
hmm
And even like in Yellowstone, if like a bear attacks a human, they try to hunt down that bear and kill that bear because now it knows it can do this, right? Um, and I mean, that happens more frequently than sharks, but I mean, um, there is this kind of myth of like, yeah, well, it's got a taste for human flesh, right? It's like chicken of the sea. Those humans are so tasty. We're such an egotistical species, man. Like, it's not good enough that we've gone to the moon. We have to be really tasty to eat too. Um, yeah, but I mean, it's really hunting that boat.
it is. Yeah,
It's pissed
I
off.
no, it is. It's an angry shark. By the end of the film, that when it comes up on the back of the orca and it's sort of it is trying to kill for vengeance the people on that boat, and it obviously kills Quint, and that's sort of that's cool. But
You know what we need? We need the Jaws prequel that is a 3.5 hour long movie with almost no dialogue, mostly from Jaws' point of view, as he's traumatized by humans, and it causes us to sympathize with Jaws.
It's
Because
our
we need
fault.
to we need
Yeah.
prequels to everything. But even in hunting that boat, like he's taking major damage.
Mm.
Like, he's got multiple harpoons in him. He's being shot. Like at the end, where he's like getting on the boat and he's being shot and shot and shot and, stabbed in the head and stabbed in the head. And you think, what animal would think this is
Worth
justifiable for a
it.
meal?
Yeah. Yeah. By the end of the film, Jaws is a monster. As in, and I don't mean monster as in sort of monster size. Like, no, he is a supernatural monster. Like, he is, it is, it's taken to that next level. And I'm fine. I'm kind of fine with that. And I think that's what, I've asked the question, like, is this a horror film? I think, more and more I'm like, yeah, it is. It's got to be. Because there was something more with that
Yeah.
shark. Because it's not just a feeding frenzy, is it? It's just the oh, to,
Unthinking, unyielding monster.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Because
or,
he lost his mom due to humans in the prequel movie.
or children. Yeah, this is the
Yeah.
sort of the dark side of Finding Nemo. Like Nemo didn't survive, and it just happened to be a shark. It goes on a rampage. Um,
Nemo's back and he's out for blood.
yeah. Um, killing Nemo. Um, but I want to sort of flip this to the human side because I think that's where the film sort of is the most interesting. And um, one of the things I sort of find there's a characters in this film which will really sort of focus in on the sort of the main three towards the end of as we get to that climax. But I like how they sort of depict Amity.
Mm-hmm.
It's this sort of like beachfront community. It's a small island community that relies on the summer dollars. It has these sort of small town people clearly know each other, and I like the sort of again there's a Spielbergian thing like and the other directors have do it as well as well is this sort of peppering in of sort of small town Americana. The sort of like the not so much the nothingness, but sort of like the sort of minutia of this town, like the stuff that it's dealing with. Like at one point, one of the major complaints for the town for the chief of police is that the karate club are coming out of the club and all karateing someone's fence.
Yeah.
And I've always loved that. And then someone else is complaining that, like, the front of their store has been blocked, and then there's, there's these sort of small complaints that are coming through because this is a small town community that's sort of well connected. And it makes you wonder about some of the decisions. It makes me sort of consider the decisions that are made, and the decisions made by Mayor Vaughan.
Mhm.
I often sort of I flipped on this because everyone sort of depicts him as like the bad guy. All right, oh, he's a bad guy. And he's smart, he's smarmy, and he's slimy as a sort of a mayoral sort of politician. And he's like, no, the beach have got to stay open, and it goes wrong because other people get attacked, and it leads to the big climax. If the shark, however, had gone
Mm-hmm.
and it had all carried on as normal,
Which the shark would,
yeah,
right, in real
yeah,
life.
um, then he's the mayor that saved that summer, you
Right.
know. And so he's sort of having to tally up this thing of going, well, I've got to keep the town running. We've got businesses, we have families that rely on this summer dollar throughout the winter,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing. And so as I get older, there is a part of me that's kind of like, calling him just an outright villain is kind of simple.
Yeah.
We as the viewer know that Brody and in Hooper are right because they're the protagonists.
And they're the actors we recognize.
Exactly, yeah. But like, there's a part of me as I've got older, I've watched him going like, well, the mayor's not
Yeah.
totally wrong. Like he makes some poor decisions. Like like, yes, he probably should have called off, given them a bit more. to hunt the shark. But he can't just say, "Yeah, we're going to lose the summer dollar this year," because I could bankrupt families. They could foreclose on homes. Like, he knows that this is really important. So yeah, it just
Well,
wasn't.
and I mean, close to home, we had the Lahaina fires on Maui.
Hmm.
There's, that was a couple of years ago now. There's been a big debate over, tourism there. And there are certain people who say, well, we don't want more tourists. We're busy healing. But there, is probably a majority that are saying, like, we need to bring people back. This is a huge part of our economy. People
Hmm.
are scared. People don't know if they'd really be welcome or if there are accommodations or whatever. I mean, these are real concerns and these are real debates. And I think that it's easy to see the mayor as sort of representing commercial interests, right? And
Yeah,
representing kind of
evil capitalism.
evil capitalism, right?
Yeah,
But as you say, he seems dumb, I think is the problem. He seems uninterested in the facts,
yeah,
until it affects his own family potentially, um, in the sort of ridiculous causeway, lake scene. Um, but you're right that I mean he's not wrong, and this is really a small town that really depends on. It's a small New England fishing community.
mm,
I do think those dynamics with the town and the town hall and the mayor are the most interesting part of the film for me.
yeah. No, I agree, and so I've always sort of debated this thing because he does. He makes instance, he makes some tough decisions, but like you say, it's the fact he doesn't take into consideration the opinions. He's kind of sort of like, no, we're just gonna do it. And I think the way he does things, he's always kind of smug and sort of smarmy about things, um, which obviously gets on people's nerves. Um, but you're right. I like the town halls. Again, this is that thing we talked about this a little bit with Alien. This thing of like scenes where people talk over each other and this sort of the way that they interact. That town hall. I mean, there is actors, there are characters in this that like they are given almost like a half a scene or a scene. They never come back. They're never important, but that scene feels important. And the scene I'm talking about is when they bring the town together, and they're sort of like the first guy comes in, and the Kittner, Mrs. Kittner, the woman who's lost a child, has put a reward, and it's like $3,000. And someone sort of makes a joke about it. And you've had this woman who's a sort of like, I think she runs a small business or something, and she's basically having this sort of conversation and sort of small talk with someone. And you see her, she says, I don't think that's funny at all. I don't think that's funny." And it's just this sort of the way she's talking to people around her feels so natural and so sort of like almost like judgmental. The guy's just making a joke, but she's sort of like it's that small town mentality is done so well in some of those scenes that like you feel like, oh, Amity's like a real place. Like you could go to Amity to
Yeah.
the beach there. Yeah,
And those characters they feel three-dimensional.
yeah,
Even though they might only get a few lines of dialogue. And I love the shark hunting scene.
oh, yeah,
Uh, as people are going out trying to earn their $3,000 and getting ramming each other's boats and throwing dynamite in the
yeah.
water and the absolute chaos.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's brilliant. I love that bit. And Hooper comes up and he's sort of like, if you don't do this, like you're gonna drown. Like all you are dead. Like no one's listening
yeah,
to him. Yeah, just the chaos of that scene is uh is really good. Um, but it shows that mentality, doesn't it? Like again, it's that thing of like, there's no. It's about the sort of the commercialization of it. It's the reward. They're all going to go out and they're going to get this sort of $3,000 or whatever it is, $5,000 for this shark, and they're going to do it anyway, and they're going to put others at risk in doing so. If anything, all those boats chucking dynamite and stuff, with harpoons and guns and stuff, are more likely to kill each other than the shark
mhm.
itself.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
And so I love that sort of scene. I also love um, when they do catch a shark and everyone's really there's that sort of element of self-congratulatory congratulations, and even Brody's like, oh no, look at this, it must have been this. Like as you said, there are other fish in the sea, there's plenty of other stuff going on out there. Jaws is just a different fish. But there's a moment when Hooper sort of, some sort of says, "Oh, what kind of shark is it?" And he tells them, "I think it's a tiger shark." And you just get the guy going, what?" Like I said, they have no knowledge. They've got no
Mhm.
understanding of what it is they've been doing out of the sea. They just got lucky, and um, yeah, that whole scene again just works really well for me. I think it's really
And that
fun.
feels very accurate, right?
Mm,
I mean, it's unlikely that they would catch sharks statistically, but I mean, the idea of, I mean, it's this thing of, um, like the way humans believe what they want to believe, right?
yeah,
Um, you know, you're in an accident and you say, "Oh, it's just a scrape," it's like, no, there's a
yeah,
hole in that guy's head,
yeah,
like, our brains believe what we want to believe, and so without really any research, any data, sure, that's the shark. Um,
yeah,
and I do like this discussion of like, you want to cut it open here on the dog and have parts of this boy fall out.
yeah,
I will say that the autopsy scene is one of the moments where I ding Spielberg, where it's clear that like clearly chopped fish parts are pulled out, and a barely touched license plate that's been like,
yeah.
hey, I don't know why it would have eaten a license plate, but I mean, this small collection of stuff that's thrown out seems below the Spielberg standard.
Yeah, no, this is the kind of thing I can imagine there being like a blooper or a sort of a deleted reel that they've done for a joke. Like this is almost like a clown car, isn't it? Or like Mary Poppins bag. Like they'll be like, here's a lamp, here's a standing lamp, here's an entire sort of dinner set. They just keep pulling. If this was like Austin Powers or like you could do a
Mm.
gag from this. Just keep pulling out ridiculous stuff.
Oh, a full tea set,
Yeah, yes, still in, like still warm, that sort of thing.
yeah.
Um, So yeah, I've always had kind of problems with that scene, exact for the exact same reason. It feels kind of perfunctory, like they've got to prove the shark that this isn't the shark. So that's the best way of doing it. But it kind of feels a bit like we know it's not the right shark. So that's a shit end to the film otherwise. But we've got to get we can't just acknowledge it and move on. We've got
Well,
to
there's
sort of have
there's
that
like
scene.
a fish head that's been clearly cut, and then
Yeah,
there's a whole fish, and none of it is digested. It all looks straight from the market. I mean, there's that white milky stuff that pours
mm.
out that's kind of gross, but
It's
for the most part, it's
that's what's used for androids
yes.
in the future.
Well, see, that tiger shark is actually a replicant,
Yeah.
so
Yes. Yeah. Um, but it does lead to um the final sort of like, this is the big sort of final sort of attack, isn't there? It's sort of the in the they call it the
the
pond.
hunt.
Yeah.
Oh, or the attack and the yeah. I have a problem. Like they say, oh, he's in the pond, he's safe. But then you see there's a causeway connecting the
Yeah.
two. So why did you think he was safe?
And then
Where's this causeway? There's no sense of geography.
no, I've always been wondered because I'm like, I always, when I was a kid, I was like, how did it get in there? Because
Yeah.
I always assumed it was like a separate body of water that was sort of man-made, but no, clearly not. It's just a different.
There's like a
I don't know.
separate little like estuary that the
Yeah,
pond flows out to sea at. So, like, yeah, I guess the shark
it's
is
no.
less likely to go, but it's a pretty big, it's more than a canal. I mean,
Yeah,
it's a pretty big,
I think it just
connecting
has. It
path.
has. Yeah, it just has like less tidal impact, doesn't it?
Mhm.
That's why it's sort of. That's why they have the boats in there, and the old women go in there. Um,
But give
but
us an
yeah,
overhead shot, right?
yeah,
Clearly, that's not actually the geography, right? So they can't give you an overhead shot. But
no. And I do wonder sometimes, like I say, this is that kind of thing of modern Spielberg going back and making this. You'd have like drone shots and some other bits and pieces that would obviously like would establish that much better because he's actually kind of good at that sort of stuff usually. This is
mhm.
early on, so
Yeah.
but you are right. It's a weird scene when you sort of like, they're like, oh, why are we going to go in the pond? And you're like, the pond seems just as dangerous as everywhere else. Like,
Yeah, this also does a very good job of sort of dramatizing, like, oh shit, I see a fin, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
the fin is that sign of like there are those shots of fins in the background as the kids are playing, that are, effective and creepy, right? Although I do have to say, you have those two kids who have that cardboard fin. How the hell are they breathing underwater? Like, it's very unconvincing. But I mean, it's a funny little
Yeah,
gag that kind of
all the boats are surrounding them, and they've all got their guns out and stuff. Like, yeah,
it's
that's quite
surprising
cool.
they didn't shoot those kids.
Yeah.
Come on, these are Americans.
Mm. Oh, they'd have blasted the crap out of that water, and then yeah, um,
Yeah, that's the real story is more children were killed by hunting the shark than by the shark.
yeah, yeah. But it does lead to this. The escalation is about this Finn. That's a really good point I want to make because one of the things that the films that come to mind, you say about Jason. For me, I think about Halloween. And yeah, this thing of John Carpenter and Spielberg, sort of like, in certain elements, the use of music. Again, like, Michael Myers on his own isn't particularly, he's kind of creepy, but not totally scary. The same with the shark, Finn. Like, you see the fin, you go, oh, there's the fin. But the fact that, like, the music gives that sort of, like, and then I like the fact that when this fin sinks underwater, so does the music. Like, the music's giving you that sort of, and it sort of goes under. It, like you say, it really is like emotionally sort of like playing with us, and the music is just wonderfully balanced to sort of give those creepy moments that kick that they need. Um, but this kind of thing, it also leads to the famous, we've also got the famous sort of dolly shot of the dolly zoom, which when someone's attacked, I just wanted to sort of mention that because I think that's a really cool shot. But this is that moment when things have gone really wrong, and Brody's like, right, we've got to hire Quint to do the thing. Going back to the town hall, though, I want to talk about Quint. His introduction, played by Robert Shaw, who died too young, died only sort of 3 years after making this film. Um, also known for From Russia with Love. But what were your thoughts on sort of Quint and his introduction?
Yeah, he reminds me of sort of like a character out of the Popeye movie.
Yeah.
He's a little bit of a stereotype. Um, I mean, he's fine for what he is. I mean, I like his backstory.
Mm,
I don't dislike him as a character. I do object to, the ending with him.
mm.
Um, it's like your sort of main characters who survive, and the one guy who should survive is the one who dies. But that sort of annoys me. But yeah, what do you think about Quint?
I find Quint is a fascinating character to me because his introduction of, like, running his nails down the chalkboard, and
Oh, yeah.
over a drawing of sort of like a shark attacking someone, which I'm like, I've always wondered, like, did Quint draw that? Was like he sat at the back doodling this picture of a shark
I
before he
wondered
did
that
this?
too. Why does he
Uh,
have to run his nails on the chalkboard? Like that was one of those moments where I was,
it's to break
I
through
don't
the
know. It's
conversation, isn't
so
it?
annoying to hear that sound.
It is. I think that's the point. It's kind of breaks through the debate or whatever's going on in the town hall. But it's the fact he's a known commodity in town. He's clearly like a local kook. So he says, you all know me. Um, and he says that he'll be able to catch it, mount it, for whatever the price. And then sort of leaves them to it. But they then go to the hunt, and that's when it goes to hunt. But like he is this kind of character. When it comes to it, you see about his death. To me, he becomes like Ahab. Like the more you learn about him, the more sort of his fight, his attitude towards this shark and towards this mission, I suppose, towards this hunt, sort of starts to make more and more sense. Like this becomes increasingly personal, um, and it becomes almost like Ahab and Moby Dick, where it's sort of like I've got to take on this shark. This shark is something special. This is the one I've got to take down, and he's willing to sort of Um, almost like like he's when he like smashes up the radio to stop them calling for the Coast Guard to come out and other bits and pieces. Like he sees this as his personal mission. And it costs him, like, it's that sort of thing of him becoming sort of obsessed is what sort of ends up, it's not really because his hand gets run over by a barrel, but um, it feels more and more like it was his death. His death is almost inevitable because it's going to be him versus the shark. Um, where the other two are sort of more of a distance from it. They're trying to sort of see it in a different way. Um, but I do kind of see him as this person that sort of had 30 years of sort of baggage that's led up to this point because of the sort of story within the Indianapolis. Um, I don't
Yeah,
know.
I mean, I like that he's this kind of isolated figure, right? Like you imagine he hasn't had a relationship for a long time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's traumatized, he's pretty isolated. He's the sort of like classic sailor who's like, I'm married to the sea, you
Yeah.
know. Um, and I don't know, I sort of see I like the Ahab analogy. I mean, I sort of saw if you look at like Brody Quint and Hooper, I see if anyone I see sort of like Brody as the person who's turned into Ahab. Um,
Mm.
because he realizes, he's the one who takes it seriously from the beginning, realizes this is serious, and then decides like everything has to stop. We have to get this. I sort of saw Quint as the professional. Like, I mean, Quint is the guy, right?
Hmm.
Um, he's the one who's been doing this. Um, Hooper's kind of like the professional, but in a different sense. He's the sort of like academic professional who understands the terminology, understands the statistics. You know, he's working in a lab. Quint is, I'm out in the field. You scientists don't know what it's like out there,
You
sort
got
of.
a silly boy's hands. Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and that and that's evident. I mean, I think, and I kind of, I love the relationship between Hooper and Quint for that. And I love this analogy you're sort of saying that like it's Brody that's driving the mission, but he's not the seafaring person. Like, he's sort of he's almost seen like a killer. Like he's trying to chase down this. He's for me, I always see him as like you say, as professional. They're all professionals in their different aspects. He's the professional cop. The only way he can deal with this is like a cop. He's like, well, I'm going to get someone. We're going to hunt this killer down, and we're going to bring them to justice, or we're going to kill them. I mean, no moment epitomizes that more for me than when Jaws is sort of circling the boat at one point, and you have like them all rushing around. He straps on his sort of like his sidearm and starts taking pot shots at the shark with his handgun, and I'm thinking like,
Hmm.
what the hell do you think is going to happen? Like it's been harpooned twice. It's been shot at with a rifle. Like I don't think your sort of 38 special is going to do a great deal. He sort of falls back to this sort of cop mentality of like he's totally out of his element. But the relationship between Hooper and Quint I find fascinating because Hooper sort of, he, as you say, he's this sort of this rich boy, but he's very well educated. He knows his stuff, but it's like sort of lab learned, college learned. And I don't think Spielberg is poo-pooing that in any way, shape, or form. I
Hmm.
think, because they both sort of end up having attributes that become very sort of important to the film. Um, but I love the fact that sort of like, Quint sort of gives him this thing and sort of like, tie me a half shank or whatever. And he does it, and he's sort of, didn't know how short you want it, so I've done this. Doesn't even look at the knot when he throws it to him. Just grabs his hands because he's like, all right, you can do the knot, but let me look at your hands. And he's like, these are um, these are the hands of an office boy. Basically, these are city hands.
Hmm.
As you say, like there's almost like a class thing here, isn't there? Sort of like, oh, you coming
Hmm.
in with your money and doing all this. Quint sort of determined to prove himself. Not, he's almost got like a working class sort of chip on his shoulder with it when it
Hmm.
comes to Hooper. But when they have that conversation and they start sort of one upping each other, and they, it starts with sort of like, I've been um, Brody's cut his head, and then He says, "I've got that beat," and he sort of no, he pulls out his tooth, doesn't he? Sort of Quint, sort of like you want to see a real wound, boom, 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 and he pulls out his tooth, and he sort of obviously had his tooth knocked out at some point through boxing, and they're escalating. There's this thing of so I got bitten by a moor eel right through the wetsuit, and they go up, and you sort of see Brody lifts up his shirt, and he's clearly been shot, and
Hmm.
you're going like, oh, that's why you left the New York. Right, but you're not trying to compete with these guys because you're on different sort of scales, and you don't really want to have to explain why you've been shot, but you've clearly got a wound there. And so I've always found that fascinating. But there's a moment that when um, he starts talking about the Indianapolis, the look on Brody's face is one of like clear admiration.
Hmm.
Brody's like, no, sorry, Brody Hooper. There's a look on Hooper's face. Brody's sort of like, "Fuck, you've been through some shit," but like Hooper's face is like clear admiration, like that you've dealt with this thing, and I just love it that there's almost like Brody, not Brody, sorry, Hooper is kind of brought down into this thing. This is that kind of this is the mission that makes him a man kind of thing. Like he's really getting into the shit of it, and he sort of admires, I think, sort of Quint through that conversation, especially when he starts talking about it and the way he delivers that speech around the sort of the sinking of the Indianapolis. And I just love that. I just think that is such a good, well structured scene. It gives you so much information, but without, as we said, sort of it's there for you to read into it, but it's not sort of spelled out. And so that's why I thought of see those characters. There's two professionals getting closer, as you say, sort of like there's no longer that gap between them. They're sort of bonding over the sort of these shared experiences. Yeah, I love that scene.
Yeah, I think it's a good scene, and I love what you're saying about especially Brody standing to the side and not wanting to participate in this. My reading of the scene is slightly different. I sort of feel like they were already drinking,
Hmm.
and Quint and Hooper have already bonded at the beginning of the scene. So, like they've been fighting, they've been, it's been city boy versus,
Yeah.
working class. Um, but as they compare scars, I mean, they're already comrades enough to drink together and they're getting along. They're no
Hmm.
longer at each other's throat as the scene begins. And I think as the scars come out, it's a way that like Quint admires Hooper and sees like, okay, you might have city boy hands, but you've seen some shit, right? I
Mm.
mean, you've been attacked by these animals, you do know what you're talking about. And then the Indianapolis is kind of it's interesting because it's a trump card, but
Hmm.
it's not played as a trump card in a competitive way. It's played as here's a trauma that, we're drunk enough and I have enough respect for you to tell you, you know, my origin story, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I like the way that's played out. I mean, it in a lesser director, that same dialogue could feel like it's just a continuation of the
Mm.
pissing contest between the two of them. And instead it feels like a bonding moment. And like you say, one that forms added respect where, Quint isn't just the guy we need who we have trouble dealing with, but um it's also in terms of like Americana, right? I mean, it's World War II. It's he was a soldier,
Mm.
obviously. Hats off, right? I mean, it's the instinctive reaction. I was puzzled by the story though. So the story is that he was on a ship that was delivering the atomic bomb,
Mm.
um, and then was afterwards torpedoed by the Japanese. Not sure, why the atomic bomb wasn't flown, but they didn't. The key thing is they didn't radio.
Yeah.
You want to interject about the?
So they didn't. He's cutting corners. They didn't deliver the bomb. They delivered several parts of the bomb.
Okay.
So the Indianapolis delivered the uranium core, and an outer shell and something else, and another ship delivered the rest, which I think was called the Pensacola. I think I want to say,
So you're
and
talking about the historic record here.
yeah. So the
Yeah.
point was that they delivered it in bits, mainly because they were a bit like, in all honesty, they were a bit like, we don't know what's going to happen if you transport this. So you've got to do it in parts, and then we'll build it at its destination, and then it will be flown over Japan. So yeah, so it did it. They sailed it. So they've sort of they transported it by ship in bits across the Indianapolis and the Pensacola, and then it was on its return trip when it was torpedoed by the Japanese. Top secret mission. That's the problem. They weren't supposed to because they didn't want to. If they couldn't radio because of what they were carrying, so it was meant to be top secret. No one's supposed to know that they were there, and so it was all. It's one of those sort of cock ups of history where you sort of go, "Oh, okay, well, maybe top secret wasn't really it shouldn't have been that important." But yeah,
Yeah,
but,
so obviously, I mean, this was a real historical incident.
mm,
Why didn't they radio? I mean, if the Japanese have torpedoed them already, the Japanese know they're there, right? I mean,
yeah.
I don't understand why, you
Well,
wouldn't radio.
this is one of those cock ups of history where, like, again, it's a very valid question. I'm sure it's one that's been debated. I think a decision was made with like we're on a top secret mission, we're completely sort of not, no communicado. I think there was just a decision that someone made that was just one of those
Follow
ridiculous
protocol.
fellow protocol, one of those ridiculous things of history. You're going like, this is stupid. Like you should have just called for help. Like I don't understand why this was a problem. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, but the rest of it's true. They did. It's still to this day considered the biggest shark attack in history.
yeah.
But I love the way he tells it. Again, it's the fact that, like you said, that Brody doesn't know what it is. Hooper does. Um, because he sort of says,
Mm.
"Oh, it's the tattoo." He sees the tattoo, doesn't he, on his arm, and he says, "What's that?" It's all Navy, and it says Indianapolis on it. And he says, "Oh, yeah, it's from the Indianapolis." And Hooper's like, "You were on that ship," and you can sort of see. And that's when Brody says, "Oh,
Mm.
what's the Indianapolis?" And that's what sort of invites Quint to tell the story. Um, but the way he delivers it as well is really cool because it gets again there's no music, it's just sort of Robert Shaw talking, and he obviously he just loads his voice, 300 men go in the water, 165 come out, rest lost to sharks. The way he does it is really, really good. He talks about his friend that sort of like Bob was bobbing in the water or pens, and he's like he's half gone and all this other stuff. Like he's seen like he's had to rest in the water with his not knowing. And he says about the sort of like the shark's eyes roll back in their head, black as death, and all this other stuff. Like he's seen these things, and it's the way he sort of comes out of the talk, the speech, that I always sort of feel is so human, is so sort of typical, where he just sort of nods and goes, "But we delivered the bomb," and it's almost like a little punchline joke. He always, like he may have told this story before, but it's always been like, "But we delivered the bomb," knowing that what the bomb went on to do as well. Um, I just think that's really, really interesting. And it leaves them stunned, doesn't it? Like they sort of end up sort of leading into um, singing. Um, but Quint's again the one that starts singing. He sort of sings actually a Napoleonic song, "Farewell and adieu to my fair Spanish ladies," and then Hooper jumps in with "Show Me the Way to Go Home." I just find that they say it's I wouldn't say it's like Oscar worthy, as it's not one of those sort of like oh
Mhm.
my god, but it's just sort of it's iconic moment on film where you just sort of like, wow, that's a monologue that is delivered so impactfully that I can't imagine being like I know this from just history. Like well, I've seen this film umpteen times. I know that speech is coming. I know that moment. I learnt the song "Show Me the Way to Go Home" from this film. But can you imagine
Oh
being in
wow.
this? Can you imagine being in the cinema in '75 and someone 30 years? There's only 30 years after the event, would probably feel a bit closer,
Hmm.
and then someone sort of, that's giving this story. I don't know. It must be. I don't know how it depend. How it would impact in the. Would it impact more? Would it be? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's curious. I mean, when we've talked about, like, say, Twilight Zone, right?
Mm.
There are these references to World War II where it's more recent and it's not quite so venerated as it is a little bit
Hmm.
later. And I think this is sort of like a little bit later where it's still recent memory in a way, but already sort of being venerated.
Mm.
Um, and of course, I imagine the story is played up for the shark. It makes it seem like the sharks are the real
Yeah.
problem. Like, you're stranded without, rations and food, and you're probably all suffering from, uh sunburn sickness and, and all of this. But, the real problem is the shark for the point of the plot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you're right, it works. I mean, it's a clever addition. Um, that I guess was made for the film.
Yeah, and it adds that depth to Quint, doesn't it? Where you're sort of like, now you're sort of like, oh, okay, your boat story, kind of beats Hooper's boat story. As you say, trump cards, you win. And everyone will now follow his lead. Um,
Well, this is the easiest way in America to to legitimize any
yes.
character is just give them a military background along with having been there at some key event. And,
Yeah, and I think that's sort of um you're right, but it doesn't feel cheap in the way that
mhm.
it can do in other films, where they'll be like, I was there, man, I saw it. And, okay. Um, but this leads to really into the sort of the final act. Beyond
Yeah.
this point, sort of like Jaws then attacks the boat, starts battering it. The orca starts to sink at this point. Um,
Ironically, the best scene of that is when Brody's throwing the chum in the water and Josh's head just kind of like circles
mm,
out of the chum right next to the boat. Um, yeah. And then after that, Jaws just, on the attack, on a
yeah,
personal mission to murder these and eat these three humans.
yeah, and and that's what I'm saying. Like, it feels almost like preternatural, but at this point, like this shark is no longer just a shark. It's it has an attitude. It wants to. It wants to. It's not just looking to feed, is it? It's looking to sort of for vengeance now for having been shot at and stuff. It's a personal mission on both sides. Um, and they're on his turf now, kind of thing. Uh, but I don't know. I do like this, and I like the thing. It's one of those things where they reduce things down. We've always said about reducing things down to the smallest possible component. And I think the Orca as a boat is it's very little as boats go. Um, it's very iconic. They've kept it sort of looking. You could draw the Orca very sort of simply. It's very well designed in that sense, with the yellow barrels at the front and the sticking out sort of thing at the front, and then the cabin and so on and so forth. But more than that, you said about the geography. Poor geography for the pond at Amity. I love how the film shows them traversing the boat. Like, it's small, very cramped, but I love how it sort of focuses on sort of like their feet going along the edge, on the
Mhm.
edge board, or having to climb up the ladder to get to sort of the steering deck, and how that the engine is sort of below the cabin and start to fill water. Like, I don't know, you kind of sort of have intimate knowledge of how this little ship works. And it becomes almost like a character of its own through this, which becomes incredibly important by the end of the film. But I don't know what your thoughts. I just think the Orca's a really cool addition.
Yeah, I mean, I like that those sideboards that you're talking about. I like that there are a number of times where characters have to get out of each other's way.
Mm.
There's that moment where Hooper is sort of like pinned with
The
inside
rope.
the rope.
Yeah.
Um, and at one point, he says, Quint says, "Get behind me," and then he rotates and says, "Okay, now get behind me
Yeah.
again," because and you have that sense of a cramped space, and um, and of this being a real ship. And it obviously, it should be said this is filmed on the water, right? Like
Hmm.
this was
Mm.
not filmed on a soundstage, and it feels like it was filmed on the water. Now, that doesn't matter. What matters is what's on film and what it feels like, but it works.
Mm.
And, kudos to Spielberg for making this work and giving you a sense of that real boat. This does
Yes.
not feel like, it was shot, on a flooded soundstage in Burbank.
No, and I can imagine, as our has been, as you said before, has been well documented. The problems that came with filming this in open water, are sort of well known. That it sort of caused all kinds of problems, but the decisions were made to use things that changed, right? The barrels, um, the um, following things along in the water rather than showing the shark and all that kind of stuff. Um,
And I think that the barrels is a smart
mm,
idea. Like you see Quint as the professional, right? And his goal is basically, I don't like how the Captain Ahab stuff, how he ruins the radio and he runs the engine until it's destroyed and they're basically stranded. I think those are novice mistakes that such an experienced professional shouldn't make.
yeah.
But I like that his plan is intelligent. Like he wants to get that $10,000. He's confident he has a plan. It's like, look, I might have to harpoon him 2 or 3 times instead of one, but I know how you do this,
Yeah,
right?
wear them
You
out. Yeah.
Yeah, you get them connected to this flotation device where you can follow them and it's going to wear them out. They're already wounded, um, strap it to the boat. It's quite logical,
Mm.
but of course, this is a magical shark that that climbs on board ships to attack humans. Um, I mean, there are moments in because this is quite a long kind of third act. Really, like the
Mm.
whole third act is them at sea, doing the final conflict with the three main characters. And there are moments where I'm quite conscious of how muted it is in a bad way and how ridiculous, you know, the whole situation is and the shark is. But there's an awful lot of it that works. And it really should not work, right? Like none of this should work at all. Um, three guys go out in a boat to bring the fight to the shark, like that, this should be boring and shouldn't really work. And, for the most part, it works.
Mm. No, I agree, and I think that's again sort of the skill of Spielberg and stuff. But I do think this sort of it works because of the actors. Um, the culmination of this thing though is um it sort of comes to the sort of the boat sort of sinking, or the engines have been sort of knackered, they're stranded, and so Hooper's going to go in his steel cage. Um, and again, I love the way sort of like Quint has to sort of explain it. It's sort of like, so you go in the cage, cage goes in the water, sharks in the water. And he's got this. He's like, I can kill him. We can, I can lure him in. I've got this sort of harpoon spear thing, and I can inject him with this, this poison that will kill him, kill the shark. So they put like the goes into water, and this is where the magical shark stuff really sort of kicks in. The shark knows to sort of like the harpoon's got to go, so it sort of manages to knock it out of Hooper's hands and
Surprise
destroys.
attacks.
Yeah, and then goes ahead and destroys this anti-shark cage in like seconds. And Hooper's then stranded underwater. It shows I don't how shallow is this water supposed to be now that they're in, because you see that you see the spear float to the bottom, and Hooper sort of swims down further, and hides behind a sort of coral. So they must be coming in. They're not
Mhm.
that. They cannot be that far off land by this point because it can't. That's it would be incredibly deep. I would have thought if you know if where they were.
Yeah, it seems like
Um,
it's sort of like 30, 40, 50 feet deep, something like
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Um, but they bring the cage up. Excuse me. They bring the cage up. That's been destroyed. Doing so is kind of knackers the ship even more. They have to sort of form up a winch. It falls in. And so you're kind of like, oh,
And
Hooper's down.
Hooper's lost.
So Hooper's lost. He's trapped. Yeah, you sort of see him swimming under. You don't know what's going to happen, but he's trapped underwater. And that's when sort of like you think, oh, that's crazy. That was insane. The shark attacked the shark cage, and then it attacks the boat. Like it literally
Yeah.
leaps onto the back of the boat and smashes up the back of the boat. And the weight of the shark lifts the orca up to a sort of into a sort of, and it starts to sink it. And both Brody and um, uh, Quint are struggling not to slide down this slide, basically down the slide into the shark's mouth. But one of the air tanks sort of rolls over Quint's fingers. He has to let go, and he sort of slides into the shark's mouth.
Yeah.
But he doesn't just slide in. I like the fact he falls onto the deck, and then basically he spends about a minute kicking the shark in the face, trying to not, and he panics. Like he is really scared. Again,
Yeah.
although it's silly, I kind of go with all this.
So, I mean, obviously the shark attacking the cage, and I mean, you know what they're going for here. I mean, this is like the Wrath of Khan, Ahab. It's just like, the final battle. The ship has to be destroyed by the end, like the last measure has been made. I find all of that unconvincing. Um, but even though it's a little bit of a replay of the dock sequence earlier, where the
Hmm.
shark just tears
Hmm.
the dock apart, and then there's a ramp and a guy can't get up. Um, it's a little bit of a replay from that earlier, but I do have to say that I Quint struggling against the shark. Um, it works, and
Mm.
you have that sense of fear of just like, I'm sliding down into a shark's
Yeah.
giant maw, and I'm, like he's able to sort of position his feet against the side of the shark's jaw
Mm.
and against the boat and kind of keep himself from sliding further as he's frantically stabbing the shark in the face. Again, the amount of damage the Jaws is willing to undergo in order to get these humans is utterly ridiculous. But it works. This
Mm.
this whole business with Quint's scenario and his death, and it does kind of jump from that to Quint already fully in Jaw's mouth,
Yeah.
up to his stomach. Um, and that shot looks good. All of this looks good. All of it works. But there's a little bit of like, how did his feet get in? You
Yeah.
know, and suddenly his whole body is down there. And of course, you can't really show the feet sliding in because, you've got a foam jaws that's,
Yeah.
doesn't really work. But I don't like that he dies in this way. I don't like that the most experienced guy, the person who, really it should be, one of the, it should be the college boy or it should be
Mm.
the cop, uh, who dies. And, I don't like that the most experienced character, that working class character, because he's a lesser character, is the one who dies.
Well, I
But I
think
would say it's shot great. I agree with you that this works
yeah,
despite the scenario being ridiculous.
yeah. No, I agree. I think it's right, and I think you're right about it is kind of a sad way for Quint to go. But I think because they've established they're younger, aren't they? One has a family, and Hooper is the young one, so they have to sort of survive almost. But this does lead to sort of the sinking of the Orca. That the Orca is going down pretty quick. I mean, and you have Roy Schneider trying to climb out of a window and sort of find the highest point, and then because you've had Jaws. Sorry, but one other point, he's gone in to sort of find a way of finding weapons, whatever, and Jaws has gone through the window as it sinks. Um, it is, it is It is incredibly it's silly at this point, but I'm still enjoying it. Like, I mean, I'm loving the fact that this is a vengeful shark. Um, and then yeah, he climbs up. We've had the information
The
already.
mast.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
we all.
great seeing him climb up. I mean,
Mm,
again, none of this really makes sense, but it's the most melodramatic, entertaining version of this you could do, right? With like the listing ship and Roy Schneider climbing up the mast, still just a few feet above the water,
it looks really effective, doesn't it? Like it looks really good. But you've had this thing about the air tanks when they were sort of loading them up, or I think when they're actually at sea, and Brody sort of like clunking a couple of them around, and Hooper says like, no, be careful because if one of those breaks, they'll explode like it's compressed air. Um, and Brody throws one into the shark's mouth. He's grabbed Quint's rifle, and like I say, he's up on the mast. Um, and he takes three shots. One goes to the left, one goes to the right, and then you get the "smile, you son of a bitch" line, and he fires and hits the air tank, and boom, blows up the shark. Um, I've always kind of had problems with this ending.
yes, rightly so.
Um, because for all the groundedness, all the stuff that's gone before it, this is the having the "smile, you son of a bitch" line and that sort of thing feels. I don't want to say it cheapens it, but it feels different to what has come before. Um, and so yeah,
Yeah.
it's an odd one. And to have him blow up with a sort of an air tank, it's a big explosion. It's all
It's an awful big explosion, and Brody is clearly not much of a shot. You kind of have to assume that he almost got lucky to hit this air tank.
yeah,
Because he's shooting at a distance at
wildly.
something underwater and
Mm,
he's missing substantially. So, I mean, I guess you could say he got lucky. But I mean, you know, yeah, I mean, like, okay, so air tanks can explode, but it's compressed air, right? So I mean, it's a pressure issue. But I mean, they're very sturdily constructed and
yeah,
regularly inspected, and generally, and they don't explode like dynamite, right? Um, and the weird thing is, I mean, the shark has taken so much damage that, you really just have to assume an air tank explodes like dynamite.
mm.
Well, we've seen dynamite earlier, right? I mean, like, can't you just have a piece of dynamite or something? I don't know. The whole shooting the air tank bit.
Well, this is the same as
It's not
shooting
the
a
worst ever, but
no, but it's the same as shooting
yeah,
a petrol tank on a car, isn't it? When you shoot the
yeah.
petrol tank and it automatically explodes when it's clearly not the case.
In
Yeah,
fiction, the Enterprise has like 10 different ways that it can explode with no warning, and there's no backup systems. All cars,
yes.
are one stray nick away from a fireball.
Yes, no, it's true. Yes, that's it. Sneeze too hard next to certain cars, and boom, it all goes up. Um, yeah, I don't know. It always felt like a cheap concession. Not cheap, but I don't know. It felt like a concession to another type of film at the end. But it needs to happen. Like they have to kill the shark, but it's fine. Um, and the film ends with Brody and Hooper sort of swimming back to shore. Um, it,
And
it,
then we see Hooper's still alive, which
yeah,
is pretty clear because we haven't seen the body, right?
yes,
And he's a main character, right?
yeah,
But I mean, it does do a good job of that kind of like Wrath of Khan thing of like all the stops have been pulled out, the conflict with the, unyielding, revenge-driven
yeah.
shark has led to, I mean, you can't get more melodramatic than climbing a mast of a listing shipping sinking ship,
Yeah.
right? Um,
All with that
and
score going on as well. Like again, that
yeah.
score in the background makes it 10 times better. It makes a lot of the ridiculousness sort of better, I think, is
Mhm.
the yeah. Sorry, you're gonna say something.
Now, as John Williams scores do, right? I mean,
Mm,
how much of Indiana Jones is utterly ridiculous, but it's sold by the fun of that John Williams score. And here
Mm.
it's drama, but you're quite right.
Um, I did want to touch on because this is an adaptation
Hmm.
based on the book Jaws by Peter Benchley. He contributed to the script. It was then tightened up by somebody else, who I should just check. Um, I read the book years ago, and um, Carl Gottlieb is also contributing to the script. Um, so he's done a couple of things. Um, but the book is interesting because the book sort of the shark thing is sort of becomes is a part is is a main part of it, but you have much more of the family thing. And one of the things that's interesting in this in the book is that Brody's wife, Ellen Brody, really resents having been brought to Amity from New York.
Hmm.
And so is actually sort of like there's even sections where she considers sort of like could she divorce him and get moved back to New York with the kids and this sort of thing. But it also turns out that that Hooper is the younger brother of someone she went to college with, I believe. And throughout the book, Ellen Brody has an affair with Hooper. And then that sort of, I think, doesn't really amount to much, but it's sort of, I think it's there to have some sort of like rather poorly written sex scenes. Um, but the book definitely feels sort of like grubbier.
Yes.
I can't remember much about it, but it feels like what's the word, like a paperback kind of, it's all titillation and
It's
gore.
trashy and salacious stuff,
Yeah, yeah.
and yeah. I mean, it's funny. Jaws is renowned as such a salacious but kind of still nonetheless classic movie. I think about The Godfather, which
Mm,
is renowned as like highbrow, art. If you've ever read the novel, it's filled with trashy sex scenes.
yeah.
It is, it's funny they got Mario Puzo to write a draft of Superman just to get his name on it, when really he was known for trashy writing,
Yeah.
not being a highbrow novelist or something. Um, and I think that the reputation of Benchley's novel was that it was trash, right? That it
Hmm.
was, entertaining. I mean, it did get some nautical things right. It wasn't, trash on that level, right? But that it, like you said, has some poorly written sex scenes and doesn't really know where it's going with a lot of stuff. Um,
Yeah, and that's my memory of it. It's been quite a few years since I read it. But what's funny is I find that the film has elevated the reputation of the book
mhm.
to such an extent that the Folio Society released an edition of Jaws last year, and that baffled me because I was sort of like,
Yeah,
I was like, this isn't the
for good
kind of
reason.
this isn't the kind of thing I expect to get from the Folio Society. This book's crap. You're trying to sort of branch out into sort of more popular fiction. There's better books than this that you could do it with rather than Jaws. But there you go. Um,
Yeah, but they got money, right? I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
no, it's not
Um,
it's not a highbrow novel by any means, right?
no,
I mean, Ian Fleming is more highbrow, considerably more highbrow than Peter
yeah. Well,
Benchley.
his plotting is tighter than Benchley's. He went back to the well. Obviously, he wrote. I think it's called. Is it called Beast or the Beast or something like that? That's it. They do. It's about a giant squid. Um, and he tried to
Why
sell that.
not?
Yeah, he tried to sell that in the same way, and it eventually got turned into a TV miniseries. I think in sort of either the late '90s or early 2000s. I've seen a little bit of it. It's not good, but the book apparently is awful. Um, so I do think he rode on the sort of the back of the film for quite some time.
It's true that Benchley, was a conservationist and he knew the nautical stuff. And that's a
Mm.
lot of what he brought even to the script of the movie. I mean, Spielberg and others were like, right, these are totally unlikable characters. This plot doesn't go anywhere. You do know what you're talking about when you're talking about the ocean. Um, so uh
It's a bit
we
like
don't
those Jack
mind
Ryan.
when
It's a bit like those Jack Ryan novels. We sort of said we were talking about some off air about the Hunt for Red October. You read some of those, and they're like they get all the sort of all the technical stuff of all these things right. None of the characters are sort of like anywhere near being three dimensional. You're like, I don't know what's going on. These people are in, I don't want to read about them. But this submarine sounds fascinating. It really is.
yes.
Yeah. Um,
A- And Benchley regretted because he cared about conservation. He regretted the effect of the movie Jaws on, people out to kill sharks and, hating aquatic life.
that's quite funny. I mean, it's yeah. Um, as you say, it had a detrimental effect. To this day, I thought you said this has been a really. I mean, 50 years later, I think we hit the nail on the head. We sort of as we wrap up the legacy of this film. Really is I would say is twofold. Is the career of Steven Spielberg. I think this sort of gave him. I don't think it cemented him, but it announced him to the world and allowed him to then have a run of films that basically sort of cemented him then as one of the go-to directors of the time. I mean, he follows this with like Close Encounters, Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T. It's sort of
1942,
all right, yeah. Less said about that, the better. But
1941.
yeah, but but the fact he was able to get that, the cash for that showed. I think the sort of he landed with those other films before he had a real cock up.
Yeah.
But no, it introduced Spielberg to the world, and Spielberg's gone on to do some phenomenal work. But you're right. The other legacy is this made the world scared of sharks, and I think that
Well,
the Jaws impact, as I say, but also made them cool. It also made sharks cool, but people are scared of them, but they're cool as well.
yeah, they talk about it as like the ultimate predator,
Yeah, killing
eating
machine.
machine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, which is true in some ways. I mean, um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, obviously I am not happy about the effect on sharks.
Hmm.
Um, and bothered by this. The Spielberg thing, I mean, I think Spielberg is great. Um, I think he is sometimes looked down upon by sort of like high art film critics. Um, you know, um, well, I think largely because he's popular.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't think that's really fair. And I think, nobody can sell a scene like Spielberg, right? I mean, Spielberg knows to ground stories and characters. He, is so good at just, I mean, you can parody it, the sort of like awe moment. But how often have we talked about movies where I said this is missing that Spielbergian kind of awe moment, right? Like the audience needs to be dazzled by this, and Spielberg knows how to dazzle that audience.
Hmm.
Um, and he's not a one-trick pony either. So I mean, I think Spielberg is, a master of the form. I think he, is fantastic. I would say there's a third influence, which is the blockbuster.
Yes. Oh,
And
yes. Very good point.
so of these three influences, one is really bad for the real world, right? About sharks, and one is good for art about, helping Spielberg personally. But the effect on the movie industry in terms of championing this blockbuster mentality is catastrophic.
Mm.
Um, and I think that, between this and Star Wars really spelled the end for the 70s auteur period
Oh,
where,
100%.
I
Yeah.
mean, they used to just give directors, near unlimited budgets to make whatever they wanted. I mean, basically studios were out of the business of giving notes. I mean, on, things like The Deer Hunter and, I
Yeah.
mean, we had all these just like great weird movies in the 70s. And, it was very artist driven. And unfortunately, the blockbuster, created this hyper commercial, the tent pole mentality that we have now. And now we're in an era where, it seems like nothing is distributed except for wannabe blockbusters. All of which make Jaws seem like a quiet artistic movie by
Yeah.
comparison.
It kind of lit the fuse, but the dynamite that went off later on was the problem. I think,
Or the air tank.
yeah, yeah, exactly, yes. Um, I think this is a really good point. I think what it showed was the margin for profit that was available. It hadn't happened before, and I think the margins on films had always been accepted as we make this film, we just gonna make a bit of money off the back of it. That's how we stay in business, and that's how we sort of pay each ourselves. We basically get paid to make these films, and if we make a bit of profit, then everybody's happy. That was kind of, you know, the um the way these films have been made for years, for decades, really. I mean, the studio system of the 30s through to sort of like the 60s was exactly that, wasn't it? Bang out films as fast as possible for in these with these people, and we'll make some money back. That was generally the sort of the mentality. Yeah, I think Jaws and Star Wars. Jaws opened the door. Star Wars cemented it as an approach, and I think Star Wars introduced a second legacy, which was merchandising,
Mhm.
where
Absolutely.
I think Jaws sort of touches that because Jaws T-shirts were very popular. Like that iconic poster, as you sort of said, became
Mhm.
printed on loads of T-shirts. But you're right. This opened the door for super profits. That was kind of like how it was sort of seen. Um, and yeah, I think we have both enjoyed and suffered the consequences of that for the last sort of 50 years. Um,
Yeah, and I think largely suffered. I mean, I think Jaws on its own could have been seen as a fluke, right?
mhm,
Like
mhm.
this is this sort of like silly movie about a shark attack that's just directed fantastically, well acted. Um, it struck the zeitgeist, okay, maybe that was a fluke. Um, but you mentioned like the poster, right? I mean, this is also um like posters are becoming iconic, and you have previous ones that were sort of iconic, but you know this is sort of like, well, the poster, the way we sell Jaws is as important as anything, right?
Mhm.
um and then Star Wars kind of cements it, and sadly you fast forward 50 years, and you know we live in an era where you couldn't get Jaws made. I mean, it would all be CGI. It would be terrible, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, the technology would allow it in some ways to be much better, and in other ways to be much worse, because a lot of what works here is working within those limitations. Um, but it's a very quiet, small movie. I mean,
Mm.
I mean, even most of the horror movies done these days, and I think you're right that this is essentially a horror movie. Um, you know, have to be much more bloody and over. I mean, what, four people die in this?
Yeah. But about it, really. Yeah.
I mean, we're gonna need at least 40 to, and some more FX shots. And what if Jaws is from the multiverse? you know,
Jaws variants are going to introduce themselves throughout the film. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, yeah, the blockbuster effect is really troublesome.
Yeah.
And again, it's hard to lay the blame on Spielberg for having done a good job, and
Yeah.
these actors, that you can't really blame them. Um, but there are these social effects, whether it's to ecology or to uh, the movie making business in total, that are
Mm.
kind of dark.
No, I agree. And there are these films that have these kinds of effects, aren't they? That sort of like they trigger a moment, and they're usually the smallest version of those things. So, just as you said, this is a small, quiet film. I mean, the best parts of this film, actually, in my opinion, as you sort of said, are some of the human moments. Those conversations, or those monologues, or whatever. And now it's all about the the punchy punchy, the bang bang. That's sort of like what drives these things. Just want to put into perspective though, this film was cost 7 million to make in '75 and had a worldwide gross of 477 million.
Arbitrage,
Mm-hmm. And
right?
you can see why this sort of everyone went, oh, that's what we're going to. But you said like if this hadn't happened again, this would be a blip. This would be a kind of like a mega blip and sort of like what the hell happened there? Why would it hit the zeitgeist? But you have these moments. I think I mentioned Halloween. Halloween in '78 sort of triggers the slasher genre to sort of the next level. Like it existed in sort of mini form, but it took it to that next level that brought us well more Michael Myers films, but Jason, Freddy, Chucky, Scream, so on and so forth. Like the slasher genre just. And you go back and you watch those others and they're bloody and they're gory and people are getting like a machete through the face or sort of like their guts spilling out. And you go, oh my god, where did this start? You go, oh, it's a quiet film where like four babysitters, but well, yeah, four people get killed, and you don't see any of them actually really. There's no blood in it, and you're right. It's the small beginnings that create much bigger effects later on. Um, yeah, it is. It's not. It's an odd one because there's milestones along the way as well. I think like Batman '89 sort of takes it up to the next level, and then we'll have like then Avatar and those kinds of, those films sort of took it up to the next level and so on and so forth. So
And the superhero movies in the 2000s.
that's it. Yeah. Yeah. Eventually sort of like, Avengers breaking through the $1 billion and then off it goes. Um, so yeah, no, it's, you're right. You're not going to get Jaws unless it's made by sort of a small indie um, studio,
Yeah.
that's it now. Uh, so yeah, it's genuinely, I think this is a good film. I think this is a great film. But you're right. This has some really oddly, as you can't lay the blame at their feet, but people have ran with it and done, some rather annoying things as a result.
Yeah, I don't know how well this film ages. I mean, I think
Mm,
this is, I mean, certainly in a list of 100 most important films in history, this has got to be one of them. Um, I'm not sure if I showed like a 18-year-old this movie what they would think, right? Like it's a little slow, it's a little, um, it's a little unrealistic and it's sharks, things like
hmm
this.
I like the way you're saying that modern audiences will be like, well, that's a little unrealistic. I'm going to go watch the Fast and the Furious instead.
Yeah, that's true, right? I mean, let's flip cars upside down and
Through
land on
space. Yeah,
tires. Why not?
yeah.
No, that's true. I mean, but it's weird, our sense of what's realistic and what isn't. I mean, I think this is a good film. I think it's well directed. I think it's well
Mm.
acted. I do have a final thought, which is like nobody in this movie would be cast in anything today.
No.
Like, I mean, it is amazing. What like I mean, the women look like women.
Hmm.
Women, there aren't a lot of women in this film. Um, none of the men look like Chris Pratt
Yeah,
post Guardians.
yeah,
Like none
yeah.
of the men look like, Marvel characters. I mean, nobody in this movie would be a movie star today.
No,
They
no. These
could
these
not
these are
get a reading.
no. These are '70s actors, aren't they? I mean,
Yes.
you know, that's and these people are kind of why I love sort of '70s films. Do you know what I mean? Because you're going
Yeah.
like, oh, you're not super pretty and like incredibly ripped for this role. You kind of just look like a person that's lived a life and seen some shit. Like that's what I want. I want people that look craggy and um authentic. Yeah.
And maybe have a little bit of charisma, and actually can act. Like, the idea that and again, ironically, that is a big part of what was ended by this movie and by the
Mm.
blockbuster. You see those 70s actors and you think like this person was a heartthrob. right? They're not skin and bones. They've got a
Yeah.
beer belly, you know? Like they're in a shirt with a woman, and they're in a shirtless scene with a woman lying in bed, and you're like, wow, like this
Yeah.
person couldn't get a date today, let alone have a Hollywood career. Um, boy,
Yeah.
that's really staggering. And nobody in this movie would even get a reading today.
Yeah.
And it's
It's
just a
true.
shame.
Yeah, no, I agree. I do. I definitely think there's yeah, this kind of actor is of a uh bygone age. And I do think that's a sad thing. So this is why, again, yeah, 60s, but specifically the 70s and early 80s, there's a kind of breed of actor that you're right. You're just like, oh, you've made it because you're actually kind of good at what you do, and you've got range, and you've got a charismatic face. I mean, one actor who I don't particularly like, but we have discussed that I watched him in something the other day, James Woods, and here's another one where I'm like, yeah, how did you get a job? Like, you're an angry looking dude all the time. Like, yeah,
But he's interesting to watch on camera. Like
yeah,
I
exactly.
love watching James Wood on camera. I mean, I don't think he's a great human being,
No,
but um, yeah, I mean, today, I think about that beach going scene where the mayor is he's encouraging that couple to go in the water. And, like, I mean, that guy is, slightly overweight. And, today that scene would all be like nobody over 30.
yeah,
Even the old married couples would be like 30, 35, right? Um, Nobody would have more than 1 or 2% body fat,
yeah,
and it's just be like, it's staggering, just like how that looks like a real, New Jersey beach or something
no, it
like that
is.
of the time.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
John Hamm playing sort of like Brody in incredible shape. Um, yeah, and
And
it's that.
ironically, John Hamm is, one of the least muscle
Yeah,
bound and like
yeah,
actually has a lot of charisma and talent. Um, yeah, it's a different world. And
yes,
that is shocking to me, 50 years on.
yeah. But it has an effect. I think I just want to sort of echo on this point that um, we are going to eventually sort of get back to, and we need to do something with our Akira Kurosawa series,
Mm.
and we're going to get to um, the Seven Samurai and the associated films of the Magnificent Seven, and that's another one where you watch that and you'd be like, this has got like Yul Brynner, Charles Bronson, and you're going like, oh yeah, this is a not a this isn't the most attractive cast. Like, and then you go, all right, they've remade this, didn't they? They remade this in 2017? Who's in it? Denzel Washington, Chris Pratt. You're
Hmm.
like, oh, they look different. Like there's a difference. Those that original Magnificent Seven and the Seven Samurai. Like you go like, oh no, they're people that have seen stuff. They're people that they look the part.
They look real. Yeah.
Yeah, they look real. You
Yul
watch,
Brynner is especially a case where you're just like,
yeah,
how did this person get cast? I mean, like nobody would ever think Yul Brynner was attractive.
no,
Um,
but
yeah,
but
but
then
I mean,
you,
he had a movie career.
yeah, yeah, for a reason. I mean, the guy's got some charisma. Like it's an interesting,
Oh yeah,
but
for sure.
but yeah, you're right. When you watch that 2017 Magnificent Seven, it kind of feels different.
Well, and
Um,
and these days, yeah, I mean, be like the Hooper character would be like a 20-year-old woman who was chosen because she's a supermodel. She's
yeah,
obviously no more than 20, 21, and she'd be talking about how she, was a genius and graduated college at, 12 and has been studying sharks forever. And you just think, what the fuck am I watching? What is this
mm,
nonsense? Um, the cop of the small town would be like, Chris Pratt or something, like just like
yeah,
what the I mean, it really takes you out of any realism. And
yes,
so much of why this works is that grittiness of, this town, and that it really just feels like slice of life 70s, New England Americana.
Yeah, and if you ever want to see, I'm just going to just to link up to. If you ever want to see that exactly what you're saying about that grittiness and that sort of real American, and see Roy Schneider do another film, go
Yeah.
watch The French Connection from
Hmm.
1971. Like, dude, if you think that this is slow, I love The French
Yeah.
Connection. That's an amazing film. But there are parts of that that are, and that Gene Hackman is another one where you're like, dude, it's not that good looking. He was a bit of a heartthrob apparently, but like, dude, guy can act, and that film's
Yeah.
incredible. But
Yeah,
yeah,
the French Connection is another one where gotta be on the list of 100 most important movies.
oh yeah,
But, even that car chase, you sort of, which is its most famous element, you sort of watch it and you're like, yeah, I don't know that. I mean, this would get edited the hell out of. This would not be considered exciting by today's standards.
no, no, it's an interesting one. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, I think we should wrap up on Jaws because there's lots there to more to about. But we've reached I think the 2 hour limit. But
Hmm.
50 years of Jaws. Ladies and gentlemen, what are your thoughts? Does it stand the test of time? Is this, as we sort of suggested, one of the 100 most important films, but has had some sort of unfortunate consequences on the future of movie making? And what are your thoughts on the sort of this compared to modern movie making? Does it stand up against other films? And should we have reached Jaws 19 by now? That's the real question. So let us know.
RoboCop versus Jaws.
Yeah, RoboCop versus Jaws in a surf competition. Um,
I could just see him scanning the crowds, as Protect the Innocent goes up. It's just,
yeah,
know.
conservation is directive number 4. Uh, protect the environment. Yeah, but anyway, on that note, if you want to hear more of Julian and I, go and check out the previous podcast. We've just done the G.I. Joe retrospective, and we've talked about Babylon, which was fantastic, and Yes Minister. So we've done quite a bit recently. And I've got a Superman retrospective coming up as well with some others, so that's going to be exciting. But also, if you want to go check out the Patreon and our sister podcast, Stories Out of Time and Space, that's Julian and I talking about all kinds of sci-fi films, going back to the 30s. We've covered films from there all the way up to modern day. And on the Patreon, we've just done our RoboCop retrospective. So go on there and check that out as well, because then we're going to move on to our next season as well. So lots and lots of great conversations and sort of, actually getting some quite detailed debates and sort of discussions around some of these things with some of these films. But for now, Julian, thank you very much for joining me for Jaws. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been good fun. I'm now going to extract myself from the water and not have to go in it again. So I'm happy about that. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And we shall see you on the next episode.